Of Mice and Men is centred around a dream, one that everyone in the novel seems to search for but no one can reach. A few acres of land and a family of rabbits, alfalfa growing in the field, and a little house where you can shut the door at the end of the day and belong to yourself. George tells it to Lennie the way a parent tells a bedtime story. With the same words, in the same order, a plan worn so smooth by repetition that it starts to sound like a prayer. As the story unfolds, we can see the truth of this. George and Lennie aren't discussing a business proposal. Their dream is an act of faith, and that's what makes it transformative. John Steinbeck published Of Mice and Men in 1937 in the pit of the Great Depression, when the distance between the American promise and the American reality had never felt wider. He wrote it in 6 weeks in a barn in California, and it has a compressed, pressurized quality. It's a novella that reads like a parable, quick and unnerving, yet rich with symbolism. On the surface, it's a story about 2 men who want land and can't have it. About the violence that runs just under the surface of a world they live in. About a system that grinds people down and calls it justice. But underneath that surface, the real story is much older. The human need for a place to call home. The ancient memory of a garden we were exiled from. And what we do with the longing that remains. In this video, I'll argue that Of Mice and Men is, at its deepest level, a theological novel, in the sense of being organised around its ideas. Theology has always wrestled with the meaning of the fall, the function of hope, and what it means to be a creature who can imagine a better world. Steinbeck's aim isn't to console. He draws on the myth of Eden and the tradition of John Milton's Paradise Lost to give his character's suffering a frame large enough to hold it. In doing so, he makes a claim about hope that is, I think, one of the most honest and gritty in American literature. Hope in this novel doesn't save anyone from their fate, but it does something more important and far more interesting. The title of the novel comes from Robert Burns's poem To a Mouse, written in 1785 after Burns accidentally destroyed a mouse's nest while ploughing a field. The best laid schemes of mice and men, Burns writes, go often awry. But I backward cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I cannot see, I guess and fear. The poem's epigraph also serves as its argument. The innocent mouse doesn't know his home is gone, but the man does. He can look forward into an uncertain future and backward into a ruined past, with a kind of double vision that is uniquely human. This is the burden that only we bear, and it's the one that Steinbeck inherits and deepens. Because George and Lennie are men who carry, in the very structure of their longing, the shape of something that was taken from them before they were born. The dream of the small farm, the land, the rabbits, the independence, and the door that closes against the world, is Eden, the original garden. They've never had it, but that doesn't make their longing any less real. Perhaps the fact it's a dream, an ideal, makes it even more worth aiming for. They're not grieving a specific loss, but a constitutive one. This is the theological idea at the root of the Christian concept of original sin, which is older than Christianity itself. The Hebrew word for Eden means pleasure or delight. The garden in Genesis is a place of belonging. It's not a utopia in a political sense, of a perfect society, a just arrangement of competing interests. It's a home. Humans are made from its dust and return to its soil. They have names for its animals and can walk in it in the evening with God. What the fall destroys goes deeper than happiness. It's an unmooring of human belonging in the world that was, according to the Old Testament, the condition of our original nature. John Milton's Paradise Lost, published in 1667, is the great English meditation on what that loss costs and what it opens onto. In their exile from the garden, Milton's Adam and Eve are expelled from a mode of being in which the world was legible, in which everything around them made sense and belonged to the same order as they themselves. After the fall, the world becomes opaque. Animals become predatory, and labour becomes painful. Time, which before was just the rhythm of a good day, becomes something that wears you down. But Milton's crucial point is that in this exile was also a great opening, a chance to redeem its darkness. The angel Michael tells Adam, in the poem's final books, that he may find within himself a paradise far happier than the one he's lost, if he can learn to cultivate the virtues. The loss of the original garden is only the beginning of a deeper story, one which encompasses how to be human. Steinbeck is not Milton, and Of Mice and Men is not a religious poem. But the structure of Milton's argument organises the novel in ways that are hard to miss once you see them. George and Lennie live in a fallen world. The world of the California ranch is one where grace has withdrawn. It's a world of casual cruelty, broken solidarity, and a justice system that protects property and punishes poverty. In the middle of it, 2 men keep telling each other the story of a garden. It's not a naive dream, but one which is already coming true. They keep telling each other the story because the telling does something. Hope, even if it can't be fulfilled, is alive. It changes the way you carry yourself through the world, and it changes what you're capable of. George tells Lennie the dream not for the first time and not for the last time, on the night they arrive at the ranch, and there's a ritual, meaningful quality to it. Guys like us, George says, that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They got no family, they don't belong no place. They come to ranch and work up a stake, and then they go into town and blow their stake. And the first thing you know, they're pounding their tail on some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to. And then, with us it ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. The dream is what makes us possible. It's the shared imagined future that turns two lonely men into a family. And it brings them home. This is the true meaning of Eden. It's not a place to get to, but a way of being together. The fallen world makes it almost impossible, and the dream just barely keeps it alive. Eden is the novel's background theology, which maps onto the reality of the California ranch. The ranch is a fallen world in the most precise sense. A world that's missing something essential, and where the remaining parts grind against each other without the lubrication of care. The social arrangements of the ranch are totally unjust. But this injustice is entrenched. It's been going on for so long that it seems like the natural order of things. Curly is the rancher's son, and his power is purely a matter of birth. He didn't earn his authority, and he doesn't question it. He picks fights with large men who compensate for his own smallness. And the ranch hands absorb this without visible resentment, because indignation is a luxury that they can't afford. He wears a glove full of Vaseline on one hand, supposedly to keep it soft for his wife, and the detail is as revealing as anything in the novel. A man who decorates his hand with tenderness for someone he treats as property. Slim, the most skilled worker on the ranch, and its closest thing to a moral centre, observes all of this with a clear eye. But he says very little, since he knows exactly what kind of world he lives in. The social philosopher John Rawls, in A Theory of Justice, describes a just society as one that people would choose to be born into even if they didn't know in advance what position they would occupy, with the accidents of birth and circumstance stripped away by the veil of ignorance. By this measure, the world of the ranch is comprehensively unjust, and nobody sane would choose it. The ranch hands live without security or prospects for improvement. Crooks, the black stable hand, lives in the harness room alone because the bunkhouse's racial segregation has been so thoroughly normalised that nobody, including Crooks himself, bothers to call it wrong. When Lennie wanders into his room, Crooks' first instinct is to assert his legal right to his own space, because it's the only thing he has that's really his. "I ain't wanted in the bunkhouse," he says, "and you ain't wanted in my room." Injustice, carried long enough, becomes its own kind of jurisdiction. What makes Steinbeck's fallen world so persuasive is that cruelty doesn't come from malice. It's baked into the fabric, and cruelty is only an unfortunate byproduct. The boss and the system he represents are more complex than cartoon villains. They're ordered towards the wrong priorities, protecting property and maintaining hierarchy. The workers within them are numbers, not people. Here Steinbeck diagnoses the specifically modern form of the fall, one based on the corruption of structures rather than of the soul. Milton's Satan is a rebel angel who chose his own pride over God's order. Steinbeck's world has no Satan, but it may as well. Wage labour, racial segregation, and economic instability produce satanic outcomes without anyone having to choose them. The novel's most brutal illustration of the structural injustice is the death of Candy's dog. Carlson wants the dog shot because it's old and it smells. Candy doesn't want it shot because it's his, the last living connection to his life before the ranch when he still had a future. The argument takes place in the bunkhouse with the flat, procedural quality of a bureaucratic decision. Carlson presents his case, and Slim, the moral authority of the ranch, agrees. Candy says nothing because there's nothing to say. Later, lying in his bunk and staring at the ceiling, he hears a shot in the distance. The only reaction we see is resignation, honed by the grief we recognise without Steinbeck having to name. This is a man who understands that his life is in someone else's hands. Someone who doesn't care, who will take away what he loves when it becomes inconvenient, and that he has no standing to object. The killing of the dog is the novel's first death, and it prefigures the last one. What they have in common is the cold, self-perpetuating logic of a system that has lost touch with the value of life. In a fallen world, the question, "What is this creature worth?" is replaced by the question, "What is this creature worth to me?" Such a replacement cascades into another. What was once justice is now just administration. Candy survives this barely, by attaching himself to George in Lennie's dream. "You know where's a place like that?" he asked when he overhears them talking. "I'd make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kicked off. 'Cause I ain't got no relatives nor nothing. He offers his savings, hard-won through lost fingers from a life spent working on ranches. $350 to buy a share in the dream. The moment is both touching and a little desperate, and Steinbeck lets it be both. Candy isn't a fool, he knows the odds. But the alternative to hope, at his age and in his circumstances, is a future that looks exactly like his dog's. Lennie Small is one of the great innocents of American literature. And like most great literary innocents, he's dangerous. He loves soft things. Mice, puppies, velvet, the dream of rabbits on the farm. He strokes them gently until he strokes them too hard, because his hands are enormous and he doesn't understand his own strength. He means no harm. He's never truly intended anything, because intention requires the kind of self-awareness that Lennie doesn't have. He lives entirely in the present moment, at the whim of his childlike emotions, and this is both his grace and his doom. There's a long tradition of reading Lennie as a Christ figure, and while I think that reading is too straightforward, it does point in the right direction. The innocence of a guilty man, in a world organised around guilt and consequence, is a tragedy in the visceral sense. The innocent person suffers, but it's a sort of suffering that exposes the cruelty of the world that the suffering of the guilty person can't. When a man is punished for something he did, we can tell ourselves that justice has been served and move on. When Lennie is punished, first by Curly's fist and eventually by George's gun, there's no such comfort available. In Milton's scheme, original sin requires a choice. Adam and Eve are given the power to resist temptation. They're free to choose, to eat the apple or not. And they make the wrong choice. The presence of real choice is what transforms the fall from a catastrophe into a moral event. But Lennie can't choose, he can only follow instructions. He can't form the kind of deliberate intention that moral agency is based on. He kills Curly's wife the way he killed the puppy and the way he killed the mice. Out of a need to hold on, out of panic when the thing he's holding starts to struggle. If the fall requires a choice, Lennie is unfallen permanently. He's still in Eden, in the only sense available to him. He's in a perpetual state of pre-moral innocence, and still unable to understand that his desires have consequences, in a world that doesn't run on desire alone. This is what makes the relationship between George and Lennie so much more than a story about friendship. George is the one who carries the moral weight for both of them. He knows what Lennie doesn't. He looks ahead and behind, like Burns's speaker. He can see the future that Lennie can't see, and the past that Lennie can't properly remember, trying to hold both of these responsibilities to make their shared life possible. He acts as Lennie's conscience, but without moralizing. Of the two men, he's the one with the understanding. The part of their partnership that knows what to expect when things go wrong, and carries the knowledge of what's at stake. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote about the ethical encounter with the face of the other, the moment in which another person's vulnerability presents itself to us as a claim, and calls us to respond. For Levinas, the rules of ethics have a relational quality. One is confronted by the needs of another, and feels the weight of that confrontation. George's entire relationship to Lennie is a prolonged encounter of this kind. He can't look at Lennie without seeing the claim. He's always being called to respond, and he always does. Through patience, the telling of the story, and the careful management of Lennie's accidents. The question the novel asks is what we owe to people who can't protect themselves in a world that demands self-protection. It answers not with a principle, but with a portrait. This is what it looks like, Steinbeck says. This is what the weight of care looks like, day after day between a man and his friend. This is what it costs and what it gives. At the end, he shows us what it costs when Lennie and George can't outrun the world anymore. Something rings true about the dream that George and Lennie share, about the dream that Candy joins, and about the version of the dream that briefly flickers in Crook. None of them are passive fantasies. They're not an escapist replacement for reality. They're expressions of what the dreamers value. As Aristotle would say, that expression, the sincere aiming at something, is the beginning of character. Aristotle argued in the Nicomachean Ethics that virtue is not a disposition you either have or don't have, as though it were a fixed feature of your personality like eye colour. It's something you cultivate through practice, through choices rooted in values rather than emotions. Over time, the right choice starts to feel natural. The person who's generous out of habit, even when they don't feel like it, is, in Aristotle's scheme, morally superior to the person who gives easily and without effort. Character is the sediment of choices made over time. You become what you repeatedly do, and more importantly, you become what you repeatedly aim at. George and Lennie aim at simple decency and independence, the freedom to tend their own rabbits, eat what they grow, and not be beholden to anyone. These are modest desires in one sense and enormous ones in another. Men in their position represent the chasm between a human life and a merely functional one. Sustained over years of disappointment and deferral, their shared aim shapes them. It's what makes George capable of the kind of patience and care that he shows Lennie, day after day, on ranches where nobody else would put up with Lennie for a week. George is far from a saint. When he loses his temper, we can see he resents the burden. More than once, he says how easy his life would be without Lennie. But the dream, their shared dream, the one he can only have with Lennie because Lennie is the reason it exists, is what inspires him to stick by Lennie. He aims at the farm and he becomes, in practice, a keeper. The philosopher Charles Taylor, in Sources of the Self, argues that identity is inseparable from what he calls our moral frameworks. The background pictures of what matters that make our choices intelligible to us. We don't just want things. We want them because they seem good, in a way that connects to a larger picture of what we think our lives should look like. When George says, "We got a future," he's expressing optimism and also asserting a moral framework. He's painting a picture of what two men should be able to have, of what a human life is for. The dream is a way of connecting to, and living inside, his moral ideals. This matters because it explains why the dream survives contact with reality for as long as it does, and why its destruction at the end of the novel is so much more than the failure of a business plan. When Curly's wife is found dead in the barn and the ranch hands gather with their guns, the possibility of the farm dies, and with it dies George's moral framework, the thing that made it possible for him to be patient with Lennie rather than abandoning him, to save money rather than spending it in town, and to say we instead of I. The dream was doing ontological work. It was organising his existence around a set of values and giving his actions their meaning. Without it, he's just like all the other ranch hands, a man with no future, working for someone else's land. Crooks understands this with a bitterness that comes from long experience. When Lennie tells him about the farm, Crooks's first instinct is mockery. "I've seen hundreds of men come by on the road and on the ranches," he says, "with their bindles on their back and that same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and go on, and every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in his head. And never a goddamn one of them ever gets it." It's the most honest speech in the novel, and the cruelest. And Crooks knows it. He's watched hope fail so many times that he's confused about why anyone would hope at all. But then, briefly, his defences are broken by the weight of his own loneliness, and he asks if there's room for one more on the farm. Just for a moment, he lowers the armour, before Curly's wife pulls it back up when she reminds him he has no legal standing in this world. What Steinbeck is showing us, in that tiny flash of Crooks's hope, is something about the relationship between hope and action that's easy to miss. Hope, while it lives, changes the quality of presence in the room. When Crooks believes the farm might be real, his demeanour shifts. He leans forward and he asks practical questions. For the first time in the scene, he starts to speak as though he has a future. The hope isn't a thought or a plan, but a posture. A new orientation to the world he wants to create is a new orientation to this one too. We see this collapse when he loses hope. He had retired into the terrible protective dignity of his skin colour, Steinbeck writes. A sentence that's uncomfortable to read and was probably always uncomfortable to read. It names something real about what happens to a person when his hope has been shattered too many times. This is what Steinbeck means by hope having a body. It's not a metaphor. The river of hope runs much deeper than a mental state. It's a way of inhabiting time and space and relationship. It changes what you reach for, what you look at, and what you bother to say. It changes in the most literal sense how you move. In 1954, the German philosopher Ernst Bloch, in The Principle of Hope, proposed a full-bodied perspective on hope. He argued that hope is a fundamental orientation of human consciousness, a constitutive feature of what it means to be a creature that lives in time and can imagine different futures. The human being, Bloch writes, lives by constantly projecting itself into what it is not yet. We are, on his account, inherently utopian, not in the sense of being naive about the present, but in the sense of being unable to experience the finale. The now always points toward a not yet. And this pointing, this ontological leaning toward what hasn't arrived, is what makes us capable of doing anything at all. This isn't the kind of hope that tells you everything will be fine. That version of hope is the one Crooks is rightly sceptical about. The dream told on 1,000 roadside bunks that comes to nothing every time. Bloch is describing something more fundamental. He's commenting on the structure of consciousness that makes it possible to act in the first place. Because without some orientation toward the future, toward a world that could be different, action reduces to mere reaction. You respond to what happens to you, never reaching for anything greater. George and Lennie's relationship to the dream lies in this full-bodied notion of hope. George is realistic enough about their circumstances. He doesn't stoke naivety or denial. The men insist on orienting their lives towards something, on maintaining an imaginative grip on a world that's real to them, and the consequence of this insistence is visible in everything George does for Lennie. He could have abandoned him. He could have spent his evenings in town like the other men. He could have given up on the farm, but he doesn't. He isn't certain whether the dream will come true, but he knows it's the foundation of his relationship with Lennie. The hope and the care are the same thing. The philosopher Gabriel Marcel, in Being and Having, distinguished between desire and hope on the grounds that desire is oriented towards having, while hope is oriented toward being, toward a transformation of the whole world of the self. Marcel writes, "I hope in thee for us." In his view, hope is always relational, and always exceeds the particular thing being hoped for. George is not simply hoping to get a farm. He's hoping for a world where he and Lennie can be together in peace, where Lennie is safe, where their life together makes sense. The farm is the shape that hope takes, not its substance. This distinction matters when we come to the novel's ending, because the ending is often read as the destruction of hope, and I don't think that's quite right. George shoots Lennie not because hope has died, but because the world has swallowed up theirs. No farm can keep Lennie safe now. There's no future version of their being together that this world will permit. And George knows it. He tells Lennie the story one last time. "I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you, and that's why." And he shoots him while Lennie is seeing their imagined future. It is, among other things, an act of love. And it's possible only because George, for all those years, practiced love. Because the dream cultivated in him the capacity to do the hardest thing, at the hardest moment, for the person he cared for the most. This is the novel's deepest argument about hope, and it's not a comforting one. Hope is not redemptive of the situation. George loses Lennie, Candy loses his stake, Crooks retreats back into his solitude, and Curly's wife remains what she was before anyone had the chance to learn her name. The novel itself remembers her only as Curly's wife, which is in itself an affront. The fallen world is not redeemed because people dreamed of a better one. Steinbeck refuses to offer such a consolation. Instead, he offers something more austere and more honest. The claim that hope, even hope that fails, doesn't redeem the world, but it might redeem the soul. Because the real promise of hope isn't in the material outcome. It's in the person it makes you while you're hoping. George's long practice of caring for Lennie was produced by the dream. It required patience, loyalty, and great investment. If they had never had the farm to talk about, if George had been just another itinerant ranch hand with nowhere to point his life, he would never have become the man capable of sitting in that clearing by the river and doing what he did. The virtue was cultivated in the sincere aiming, and the man was made by what he hoped for. Milton's angel Michael, at the end of Paradise Lost, doesn't promise Adam and Eve that the world outside the garden will be kind. He doesn't say that the fall was worth it, or that everything will work out. What he says is harder to swallow, but much more beautiful. That they carry within them the materials of a paradise, if they do the work of cultivating it. Add virtue, patience, temperance. Add love, by name to come called charity, he tells Adam. This is a list of deliberate practices. They are what you build, in yourself and in relationship, through the sustained effort of choosing rightly over time. The garden you lost was given to you. The paradise you might find inside is the one you have to make. Steinbeck's version of this is less explicitly theological and more political. The paradise George and Lennie imagine is a garden in the literal sense, a piece of productive land where they can grow things that belong to themselves. But the underlying argument is the same. The world is fallen, and the structures of justice have failed. The systems these men have to live by are organised around the wrong values. Still, within those structures, hope carries immense strength. For George, it looks like loyalty, like care, and like the patient daily practice of treating another person as though their life has the same weight as your own. He makes that choice every day he stays with Lennie. And he makes it because the dream is his North Star. He has something to orient by, even when the world keeps moving the horizon. The last line of the story belongs to Slim. After watching George shoot Lennie, he takes George by the elbow and says, "Come on, George. Me and you will go and get a drink." And then, "Never you mind. A guy got to sometimes." It's as plain and ordinary a sentence as the novel contains, but it carries more weight than almost anything else. Slim offers no consolation, nor does he explain or justify what happened. Instead, he offers presents. He gives George the next thing, which is a drink, and the thing after that, which is being in the world again, and the implicit assurance that being in the world again is possible, even now. Slim is the novel's remaining hope, but it's not for anything in particular. Just hope, as an orientation and an attitude, and as a refusal to lie down. Of Mice and Men is a novel about failure in the most comprehensive way. The dream fails, and the friendship can't survive the world it has to live in. The justice system fails the characters in different ways, with the same result. The vulnerable are not protected, the powerful are not checked, and the gap between them is called order. Steinbeck echoes the original Fall, one of entirely human proportions. But he also depicts a quality of life that is not reducible to its outcomes, a life which draws its meaning from journey, process, and relationship. We see this in all the small moments, in George's care for Lennie, in the way Candy offers his savings to buy a dream which may never come true, and in the moment when Crooks leans forward. The fact that Lennie dies hearing about the rabbits, looking at the farm in his mind, held by the person who has held him for years. These moments are evidence that even in a world where dreams have been cut off at the root, something keeps trying to go back. Something keeps reaching for the light. The Christian tradition calls this grace. Milton calls it the paradise within. Aristotle calls it virtue, cultivated in the sincere aiming toward what is genuinely good. Ernst Bloch calls it the not yet that structures all consciousness. What Steinbeck calls it is a farm, somewhere in the hills with alfalfa and rabbits and a door that closes and a future that belongs to you. It's not a sophisticated vision of the good life. In fact, it's barely even articulate. But the longing for it is serious. And the longing, while it lasts, makes serious people. We are what we hope for. And the hoping, even when it comes to nothing, is never quite nothing at all.